The dust had barely settled when the first shot rang out. Ethan Ward dropped behind the water trough, feeling the bullet splinter the wood where his head had been moments before. His heart hammered steady in his chest, not from fear, but from a familiar cold anger that had kept him alive through worse than this. "You're trespassing on private property," he called out, voice carrying across the yard as he reached for the rifle leaning against the barn wall. 3 men had spread out across his front property. Not professionals, their approach had been too loud, too careless, but dangerous nonetheless. Men sent to deliver a message, or worse. "Ain't private if you can't hold it, old man," came the reply, followed by mocking laughter. Ethan tightened his grip on the rifle. At 45, he wasn't old, but the war and the years since had weathered him like a fence post standing against prairie storms. He counted to 3, then rolled away from the trough, came up on one knee, and fired. The first man went down with a shout, clutching his shoulder. The second barely had time to turn before Ethan's second shot caught him in the leg. The third threw down his gun and raised his hands. "Tell Caldwell I ain't selling," Ethan said, rising slowly, rifle trained on the last man standing. "Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." The man spat on the ground. "Nobody wants this dried-up patch of dirt 'cept you and the judge. And he always gets what he wants." "Then tell him I'll bury him on this very dirt before I give it up," Ethan replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He watched as the 3 men limped back toward their horses, helping each other mount despite their wounds. The apparent leader turned back, his face twisted with hate and pain. "You're just one lonely man, Ward. Caldwell's got the whole town." Ethan stood still as stone until they disappeared over the rise, then lowered his rifle. His left shoulder burned where a bullet had grazed him, tearing his shirt and exposing an older, deeper scar beneath a souvenir from Shiloh that ached during thunderstorms. He pressed his hand against the fresh wound, feeling blood seep between his fingers. Inside his cabin, Ethan cleaned the wound methodically. The single room was spare but tidy, containing only what a man living alone might need: a bed, a table scarred by knife marks, 3 chairs, a small cook stove. The walls were bare except for a single shelf that held a silver-framed photograph. Ethan paused in his ministrations, looking up at the picture. Emma smiled back at him, golden hair framing her face, little Sarah on her lap. They would never age, beyond that moment caught in time, like insects in amber. "I let them come too close today," he said to the empty room. "Getting careless." He closed his eyes, and the memory came unbidden as it always did when he allowed his guard to drop. The smell of smoke, the sound of wood cracking in the heat. The desperate run from the Petersons' farm when he saw the column of black smoke rising from the direction of his own homestead. The terrible moment of realization when he knew he was too late. Emma's last words echoed in his mind. "Don't be long. We'll be waiting for you." He had broken that promise like so many others. He'd been helping the Petersons secure their barn before the storm hit, choosing neighbors over family. By the time he returned, his house was engulfed in flames, and no amount of screaming or fighting against those who held him back could change what had happened. "I didn't protect you," Ethan whispered to the photograph. "I wasn't there when you needed me most." Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the walls. A spring storm was brewing, the kind that rolled across the Nebraska plains like God's own fury. Ethan finished bandaging his shoulder, put on a clean shirt, and set about preparing for the weather. He had cattle to secure, a barn to reinforce. The work of a farm waited for no man's grief or pain. Hours later, rain hammered against the roof like 1,000 impatient fists. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the cabin in stark flashes of white. Ethan sat at his table, a cold cup of coffee before him, listening to the thunder roll across the prairie. In such moments, the emptiness of his life seemed to expand until it filled every corner of the room. 5 years since the fire. 5 years of existing, rather than living, of working from dawn until his body demanded rest. The town of Redemption lay just 7 miles away, but he went there only when necessary, enduring the whispers, the sidelong glances. Some pitied him for his loss. Others repeated rumors from his past in Kansas. None knew him not truly, and he preferred it that way. A sound cut through the storm, different from the rain and wind. Ethan cocked his head, listening. There it came again, the faint whinny of a horse, not from his barn, but from the road. He rose, took his rifle, and moved to the window. Through the rain-blurred glass, he could just make out a shape on the road that passed his property. A small, dark figure standing in the middle of the muddy track. Lightning flashed again, and for an instant, the scene was as clear as daylight. A child no more than 5 or 6 stood clutching bundles to her chest. Behind her, half hidden in the tall grass beside the road, lay a woman's crumpled form. Ethan was moving before conscious thought could form, grabbing his coat, rushing out into the deluge. The rain soaked him instantly as he ran down the path toward the road, boots slipping in the mud. The child didn't move as he approached, didn't flinch or call out. She simply stood, face tilted up toward him, rain streaming down her small features. Up close, he could see the bundles in her arms were not possessions, but baby's twins, by the look of them, swaddled tightly against the storm. The little girl's dress was soaked through, clinging to her thin frame. Her dark hair hung in wet tangles around a face that seemed carved from determination itself. "What happened?" Ethan asked, having to shout above the storm. The girl's voice, when it came, was surprisingly steady, as if she had rehearsed the words until they became armor. "Mama's legs have been shattered by her in-laws. You have no children." Her chin lifted, though her lips trembled slightly. "From now on, you are our father." The words struck Ethan like physical blows. He looked past the child to the woman on the ground. In the next flash of lightning, he saw her clearly young, perhaps 25, with fair hair darkened by rain and mud. Her dress was torn and bloody around her legs, which lay at unnatural angles. Despite her obvious pain, one arm reached out toward the child standing guard over her. Ethan crouched, lowering himself to the girl's height. Rain ran down his face, dripping from his beard as he studied her. No fear showed in her eyes, only fierce resolve and a desperate plea. "What's your name?" he asked, gentler than he'd spoken to anyone in years. "Lily," she replied. "These are Emma and Jacob." She nodded toward the bundles in her arms. The name Emma sent a jolt through Ethan's chest that he quickly suppressed. "And your mother?" "Grace Sullivan." Another crack of thunder shook the air around them. One of the babies, Jacob, Ethan presumed began to cry, a thin wail barely audible above the storm. "Let me help your mother," Ethan said, rising. He moved to where Grace lay. Her eyes fluttered open as he knelt beside her, blue eyes glazed with pain, but aware enough to register fear at his approach. "I'm taking you to shelter," he told her, his voice matter-of-fact. "Your legs need tending." She tried to speak, but only a faint whisper escaped. "Caldwell, don't let him find us." Her eyes closed again as consciousness slipped away. The name sent ice through Ethan's veins. Caldwell, the same man who'd been trying to force him off his land for 3 years. What connection did this broken woman have to Judge Harlan Caldwell, the most powerful man in the county? There was no time to consider it now. The storm was worsening, and the children were at risk of exposure. With careful movements, Ethan lifted Grace into his arms. Her body was light, almost fragile, but every shift brought a low moan from her lips. He carried her to his wagon, which stood ready by the barn, then returned for the children. Lily refused to surrender the twins until he'd placed her mother safely in the wagon bed. Only then did she allow him to take the infants one by one, setting them down beside their mother. Finally, he lifted Lily herself onto the wagon seat. The journey back to the cabin was slow, each jolt of the wheels over the rough ground drawing gasps of pain from Grace. Lily sat rigid beside Ethan, her small body leaning imperceptibly closer to him with each crack of thunder. The twins had fallen silent, as if sensing the gravity of their situation. Inside, Ethan worked quickly. He laid Grace on his bed, the only one in the cabin, and stoked the fire to drive away the chill. He helped Lily dry the twins and wrapped them in clean blankets. The little girl's efficiency with the babies spoke of long practice. She handled them with the confidence of a mother rather than a sister. Grace drifted in and out of consciousness as Ethan examined her injuries. Both legs had been broken, one a simple fracture, the other a compound break with the bone protruding through the skin. Whoever had done this had meant to cripple, not just harm. "How did this happen?" he asked Lily, who hovered at her mother's side. The child's eyes darkened. "The bad men came to our house. They said we belonged to Grandfather Caldwell. Mama said no. They hurt her until the bones broke. Then they left us for the night. Mama told me to get the twins and run to the road." She recited this as if reporting the weather, but her small hands trembled. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew what had to be done for Grace's legs, and it wouldn't be pleasant. He'd set bones before his own and others during the war. He had whiskey for the pain, but not enough to spare her consciousness entirely. "Lily," he said quietly, "I need to straighten your mother's legs and bind them. It will hurt her. Can you take your brothers to the other side of the room?" She shook her head firmly. "I stay with Mama." Ethan didn't argue. He gathered what he needed: strips of clean cloth, 2 straight pieces of wood, for splints, his bottle of whiskey. When all was ready, he sat on the edge of the bed and gently shook Grace awake. Her eyes opened clouded with pain, but more lucid than before. She flinched at the sight of him trying to push herself away despite her injuries. "Your legs need setting," Ethan explained. "I have whiskey. It will help with the pain, but not all of it." Grace's gaze darted around the cabin, finding Lily and the twins. Some of the tension left her body when she saw they were safe. "Do what you must," she whispered. Ethan nodded. He helped her drink from the bottle, waited until the alcohol began to take effect, then set to work. Grace bit down on a folded piece of leather, muffling her screams as he manipulated the bones back into place. Lily never looked away, her small face set in the same determined expression she'd worn in the rain. When it was done, Grace lay unconscious again, her legs bound and splinted. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow, exhaustion settling over him. He hadn't spoken so many words or been in such close contact with others in years. The sudden invasion of his solitude left him feeling raw, exposed. He prepared a simple meal, beans and the last of his bread, and set it before Lily. The girl ate slowly, methodically, her eyes never leaving her mother's form on the bed. "Mama said someone would help," she said after a long silence. "She promised." Ethan didn't respond. He wasn't sure what he was doing, why he'd brought these strangers into his home. They had connection to Caldwell, his enemy, and harboring them could bring trouble down on his head. The sensible thing would be to take them to town in the morning, to the doctor, to the church. Anywhere but here. Yet, as he watched Lily tend to her brothers with quiet competence, something stirred in his chest. a feeling he'd thought long dead buried with Emma and Sarah. He recognized it with a mixture of surprise and dismay, responsibility, obligation, perhaps even the faintest glimmer of purpose. The storm raged on through the night. Lily finally succumbed to exhaustion, curling beside the twins on a pallet near the fire. Ethan sat at his table, keeping watch, his mind working through the implications of what had happened. If Judge Caldwell was hunting this woman and her children, there would be no safety for them in town. The judge's influence extended throughout Redemption, from the sheriff to the doctor to most of the businesses. Even the church bowed to his will more often than not. Near dawn, Grace stirred again. Ethan moved to check her splints and offered water, which she accepted with trembling hands. Her eyes, clearer, now studied him with wary assessment. "Why did you help us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan considered the question. "The child asked," he said simply. Grace's gaze drifted to Lily, sleeping soundly for perhaps the first time in days. "She's always been the brave one." She hesitated. "You know who's looking for us?" It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded. "Caldwell. Then you know the risk you're taking." Her eyes searched his face. "Who are you?" "Ethan Ward. This is my farm." Recognition flickered across her features. "Ward, the man who won't sell to the judge." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "He hates you almost as much as he hates me." Ethan's interest sharpened. "Why does he want you and the children?" Grace turned her face away, lines of pain deepening around her mouth. "The twins are his grandchildren, in a manner of speaking. He believes they belong to him." Her voice hardened. "He's wrong." Before Ethan could press further, Grace's eyes had closed again, exhaustion claiming her. He returned to his chair, mulling over her words. The connection to Caldwell complicated matters significantly. Whatever he decided to do with these unexpected guests would have to factor in the judge's interest in them. Morning arrived with clearing skies and birdsong. Ethan went about his chores, feeding livestock and assessing damage from the storm. When he returned to the cabin, he found Lily awake, feeding one of the twins with practiced care. She looked up as he entered. "You didn't leave," she said, as if this fact surprised her. Ethan hung his hat on a peg by the door. "It's my home." "Not that. You didn't leave us." Her eyes, too solemn for a child, held his. "Others did." A lump formed in Ethan's throat. He turned away, busying himself with the stove. "Your mother needs rest to heal. You'll stay until she's better." Behind him, he heard the soft intake of breath, almost a sigh of relief. He didn't look back, unable to face the trust that might be dawning in the child's eyes, trust he had done nothing to earn and wasn't sure he could keep. As he prepared breakfast, a simple porridge with the last of his honey, Ethan came to a decision. These people had entered his life for a reason. Perhaps it was merely chance, or perhaps some higher design he couldn't fathom. Either way, they were here now, and Caldwell wanted them. That alone was reason enough to help them. He would need supplies if they were to stay, food, medicine, for Grace, materials to properly tend her wounds. That meant a trip to town, something he'd been avoiding for weeks. The thought of facing the stares and whispers made his jaw tighten, but there was no help for it. "I need to go to town," he told Lily as he set the porridge before her. "Will you be all right alone with your mother and brothers?" The girl nodded solemnly. "I took care of them before you." Then, with a slight tilt of her head, "Will you come back?" The question cut deeper than Ethan expected. "Yes," he said firmly. "I'll come back." He hitched his horse to the wagon and set out for Redemption, just as the sun broke fully over the horizon. The spring morning was fresh and clear after the storm, the prairie stretching out around him like a green ocean dotted with wildflowers. In such moments, despite everything, Ethan could still feel the beauty of this land in his bones, the land he had defended with blood and would not surrender. Redemption appeared on the horizon after an hour's travel, a collection of wooden buildings surrounding a town square, dominated by the white steeple of the church and the red brick courthouse where Judge Caldwell presided. Ethan steeled himself as he guided the wagon down the main street, nodding curtly to those who acknowledged him. His first stop was the general store run by Joshua Reed, a thin man with perpetually ink-stained fingers from the ledgers he kept. Reed was one of the few in town who dealt fairly with Ethan, neither overcharging him nor treating him with obvious disdain. The bell above the door jangled as Ethan entered. Reed looked up from behind the counter, surprise evident on his face. "Ethan Ward, twice in 1 month must be a record." His smile faded as he took in Ethan's appearance. "You look like you had a rough night. Storm hit you hard." Ethan began gathering supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, bandages, a bottle of witch hazel. "Hard enough," he replied noncommittally. Reed watched him move through the store, adding unusual items to his usual purchases: cloth diapers, a tin of powdered milk, a small jar of honey, a length of soft flannel. "Expecting company?" Reed asked casually. Ethan didn't look up. "Just restocking." Reed leaned closer across the counter as Ethan set his goods down. "You should know," he said in a lowered voice. "The judge is looking for a woman and 3 children. Posted a notice this morning. Says she's mentally unstable, ran off with his grandchildren after her husband died." He paused. "Sheriff's organizing a search party." Ethan kept his expression neutral. "That's so. Word is they were last seen heading west from town. Toward your place, maybe farther." Reed began tallying the purchases. "Judge seems mighty concerned about finding them before—" He trailed off. "Before what?" Reed shrugged. "Just saying he seems urgent about it. Not like him to get personally involved in a family matter." Ethan paid for his goods, noticing Reed charged him less than the items were worth. As he gathered the packages, Reed spoke again so quietly, Ethan almost missed it. "Be careful who you trust, Ward. Even the church mice report to the judge these days." Ethan nodded his thanks for the warning and loaded his purchases into the wagon. His next stop should have been the doctor's office to get proper medical supplies for Grace, but Reed's warning gave him pause. If Caldwell had the town looking for Grace and the children, the doctor would be among the first to report any suspicious requests. Instead, he turned the wagon toward the small house at the edge of town, set apart from the others, and surrounded by a well-tended garden. Martha Quinn had been a midwife and healer in Redemption since before the war, respected for her skills, if not always for her forthright manner. More importantly, she was one of the few people known to stand her ground against Judge Caldwell. The widow answered his knock promptly, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, sharp eyes assessing him through wire-rimmed spectacles. "Ethan Ward," she said, neither surprised nor particularly pleased. "What brings you to my door after all this time?" "Need some medical supplies," he replied. "Prefer not to go through town channels." Martha's eyebrows rose slightly. She studied the items in his wagon, noted the bandages and witch hazel already purchased. "Compound fracture?" she asked bluntly. Ethan blinked, taken aback by her perception. "How did you— Those supplies, plus your reluctance to see Dr. Wilson, plus the judge's sudden interest in a woman with unstable legs, as he put it." Martha sniffed disapprovingly. "I wasn't born yesterday, Ward." She stepped back, opening her door wider. "Come in. I'll get what you need." Inside, Martha's home smelled of dried herbs and beeswax. She moved efficiently around the room, gathering items from various shelves and cabinets. "Laudanum for the pain," she said, placing a small brown bottle in a basket. "Clean bandages, carbolic acid for sterilizing, yarrow and comfrey poultice for healing." She added each item as she named it. "How bad is the break?" Ethan admitted. "Both legs, one bone through the skin." Martha's mouth tightened. "Those weren't accidents." "No." She paused in her gathering, turning to face him fully. "You're harboring Grace Sullivan and her children." It wasn't a question, but Ethan nodded anyway, watching her carefully. Martha sighed, a sound of weary resignation rather than surprise. "I delivered those twins 5 months ago. Helped Grace through a difficult birth, while that monster of a father-in-law paced outside demanding to know if they were boys who could carry on the Caldwell name." She added a jar of dark salve to the basket. "For the bruising she likely has as well." "You know her," Ethan said. "Known her since she was a child. Her mother was my friend before she died." Martha's eyes clouded with memory. "Grace was raised by her aunt, the judge's wife, after that. Married Michael Sullivan 3 years ago, the judge's stepson from his second marriage, though not by blood." She handed Ethan the filled basket. "Michael died 2 weeks ago. A falling accident at the lumber mill the judge owns." Ethan took the basket, processing this information. "Why is Caldwell after her and the children?" Martha's expression darkened. "Michael discovered something documents, I think, that implicated the judge in some questionable dealings. Land acquisitions mostly." Ethan stiffened. "My land, yours and others, farmers who mysteriously decided to sell after generations of working their plots." Martha met his gaze steadily. "Michael confronted him. 3 days later, he was dead. Grace fled with the children when she realized she was next, or worse, that he meant to take the twins and dispose of her and Lily." The pieces were beginning to fit together. Ethan shifted the basket to his other arm. "How much do I owe you for these supplies?" Martha waved away the question. "Consider it payment for protecting them." She hesitated, then added, "Be careful, Ethan. The judge isn't just powerful, he's desperate. And desperate men are the most dangerous kind." As Ethan turned to leave, Martha called after him. "One more thing. The church holds services tomorrow. Reverend Thomas has been asking after you." Ethan frowned. "I haven't attended in years. The Reverend knows that." "Perhaps," Martha replied cryptically, "but faith has a way of finding us when we need it most." The journey back to the farm seemed longer than the trip into town. Ethan's mind worked through all he had learned, connecting Judge Caldwell's attempts to buy his land with the larger pattern Martha had described. If Michael Sullivan had found proof of the judge's illegal activities, it would explain both his death and Caldwell's determination to find Grace and the children. What troubled Ethan most was the realization that by helping them, he had placed himself directly in Caldwell's path. The judge already considered him an enemy for refusing to sell. Harboring Grace would make him a target. As the cabin came into view, Ethan was struck by how differently he saw it now. This morning, it had been simply the place where he existed, neither home nor prison, but somewhere in between. Now, with others waiting inside, it had transformed into something else. A sanctuary, perhaps, or a fortress against the world. Lily met him at the door, her face lighting with visible relief when she recognized him. "You came back," she said, the faintest question still lingering in her voice. "I said I would." Ethan carried his purchases inside, setting them on the table. "How is your mother?" "Sleeping." Lily glanced toward the bed where Grace lay still, her face pale but peaceful. "The babies cried. I fed them the last milk." Ethan unpacked the powdered milk first. "Show me how to prepare it properly." As they worked together, Ethan was struck by the child's competence. She knew precisely how much milk to make, how to test the temperature, how to hold each twin to prevent choking. She had been forced to become a caretaker far too young, and yet there was no resentment in her manner, only a fierce devotion to her family. Later, as the twins slept in a makeshift cradle, fashioned from a drawer lined with blankets, Ethan tended to Grace's injuries with the supplies Martha had provided. The laudanum eased her pain enough that she remained asleep through his ministrations, for which he was grateful. The less she moved, the better chance her bones had of healing properly. When he had finished, he sat back, studying her face in repose. Grace Sullivan was beautiful despite her ordeal. Fine features, fair skin now marred by a bruise along one cheekbone hair, the color of wheat at harvest. She looked younger in sleep, vulnerable in a way that stirred protective instincts Ethan had thought long buried. A small hand tugged at his sleeve. Lily stood beside him, holding out a cup of coffee she had prepared. "Thank you," he said, surprised by the gesture. She nodded solemnly. "Mama says we must always thank those who help us." She paused, studying him with that unnervingly direct gaze. "Why did you help us, Mr. Ward?" Ethan took a sip of the coffee to buy himself time. How could he explain what he himself didn't fully understand? That her words on the road had pierced through years of carefully constructed isolation. That something in Grace's broken form had reflected his own brokenness back at him. "Sometimes," he said finally, "people need help. That's all." Lily seemed to consider this, then nodded, as if he had passed some test. "Mama said someone would come. She promised." She looked toward the bed. "She doesn't break promises." As evening fell, Ethan prepared a simple stew with some of the supplies he'd purchased. The familiar routine of chopping and stirring felt strange with Lily watching his every move, occasionally asking quiet questions about what he was doing or why. He found himself explaining things he hadn't thought about in years: why carrots went into the pot after onions, how much salt was needed, how to tell when the meat was cooked through. They ate together at the table, Lily perched on a chair with a book beneath her to raise her height. The normalcy of the scene was disorienting. For 5 years, Ethan had eaten alone, worked alone, slept alone. The presence of others in his space should have felt intrusive, yet somehow it didn't. After the meal, as Ethan washed the dishes and Lily checked on the twins, Grace finally awoke fully. Her eyes, clearer than before, took in her surroundings with growing awareness. "Lily," she called, voice still weak but steady. The girl hurried to her side. "Mama, you're awake." Grace embraced her daughter as best she could without moving her lower body. "Are you all right?" "The twins, we're safe, Mama. Mr. Ward has been taking care of us." Grace's eyes found Ethan over her daughter's shoulder. The gratitude in them was mixed with wariness, the look of someone who had learned the hard way that kindness often came with conditions. "Thank you," she said simply. Ethan nodded acknowledgement. "Mrs. Quinn sent medicine for the pain. You should take some before it gets worse." "Martha." A flicker of hope crossed Grace's face. "You've spoken with her today. She told me some of what happened." Ethan measured out the laudanum as he spoke. "About your husband. About Caldwell." Grace accepted the medicine, her hands steadier than before. After she swallowed it, she said, "Then you know the danger we've brought to your door. Why would you risk yourself for strangers?" The question echoed Lily's earlier one, but coming from Grace, it carried different weight. Ethan moved to the window, looking out at the gathering darkness, gathering his thoughts. "Judge Caldwell has been trying to force me off my land for 3 years," he said finally. Pressure threats offers too low to consider. I've held firm because this place is all I have left. He turned back to face her. Yesterday, he sent men to deliver a more direct message. I sent them back with one of my own. Understanding dawned in Grace's eyes. We have a common enemy. It seems so. She shifted slightly, wincing as pain shot through her splinted legs. Michael found documents in the judge's study proof that he's been forging deeds threatening farmers, even arranging accidents for those who wouldn't sell. Your name was on his list. She met Ethan's gaze directly. That's why Michael died. That's why the judge wants the children, especially the twins. He thinks controlling them gives him control over me, and he needs me silenced. Ethan processed this information, connecting it with what Martha had told him. These documents, where are they now? Hidden, Grace replied. Somewhere only I know. She glanced at Lily, who had moved to check on her brothers again out of earshot. If anything happens to me, Martha knows what to do. The implication was clear. Grace had prepared for the possibility of her own death. The realization sat like a stone in Ethan's stomach. Caldwell is looking for you, he told her. Has the sheriff organizing search parties, claims you're mentally unstable, that you kidnapped his grandchildren after your husband's death. Grace's laugh held no humor. Of course he does, and they'll believe him because he's Judge Caldwell, pillar of the community. Her eyes hardened. He killed my husband Ethan, ordered it done at least. I have no proof beyond the documents Michael found, but I know it as surely as I know my own name. The use of his first name didn't escape Ethan's notice. It created an unexpected intimacy between them, a shared understanding of what they were up against. What was your plan? He asked. Where were you heading when I found you? Grace's gaze dropped. West, as far as we could go. Michael had a brother in Oregon. Her voice faltered. We didn't make it far. The judge's men found us the first night, dragged us back. When I refused to give up the children or tell him where the documents were, she gestured toward her broken legs. Then he left you on the road to die. She nodded. Not quickly, slowly, with the children watching. A lesson. Her eyes found Lily again, softened with a mixture of pride and sorrow. But he underestimated my daughter. When they left, she helped me to the road, carried the twins one by one. I told her to wait, that help would come. And it did, Ethan said quietly. Grace studied him as if seeing beyond his weathered exterior to something deeper. Who are you, Ethan Ward? Why would a man who's chosen solitude take in a broken woman and her children? Ethan moved to the shelf where the silver-framed photograph stood. He took it down carefully, ran his thumb over the edge of the frame, then brought it to Grace. She accepted it, eyes widening as she took in the image of Emma and Sarah. My wife and daughter, Ethan said, the words coming with difficulty. Fire took them 5 years ago. I was helping neighbors, wasn't home when it started. The familiar ache spread through his chest. By the time I returned, it was too late. Grace handed the photograph back, her eyes full of understanding. I'm sorry. Ethan returned the frame to its place of honor. After that, I rebuilt the cabin, but not my life. Kept to myself. Worked the land. He turned back to her. Until yesterday, when a child stood in the rain and claimed me as her father. A small smile touched Grace's lips, the first Ethan had seen. Lily has always had a way of knowing what people need to hear. It wasn't what I needed to hear, Ethan corrected. It was what I needed to remember. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Then one of the twins began to cry, breaking the spell. Grace shifted instinctively, trying to rise. Stay still, Ethan said. "Your legs won't bear weight for weeks. I can't just lie here while my children need me." "You don't have to." Ethan moved to the makeshift cradle and carefully lifted the crying infant Jacob he recalled. "We'll manage until you're healed." The word "we" hung in the air, its implications clear to them both. Ethan was committing himself to their care, to their protection, for as long as needed. Grace watched as he awkwardly held the baby, his large hands gentle despite their roughness. "You've made yourself a target," she said softly. "I already was." Ethan brought Jacob to her, placing him carefully in her arms. "The difference is, now I have something worth defending." Outside, night had fully descended, wrapping the cabin in darkness. Inside, the firelight cast a warm glow over the unlikely tableau, Grace cradling her son Lily, sleeping beside her twin sister, and Ethan Ward standing guard over them all. For the first time in 5 years, the cabin felt like more than just a place to exist. It felt like the beginning of something. Whether that something was redemption or doom remained to be seen. But as Ethan took his place in the chair by the door, rifle across his knees, he acknowledged a truth he had been avoiding for too long. He was tired of being alone. Dawn broke over the Nebraska prairie in ribbons of pink and gold, stretching across the vast sky like God's own watercolors. Ethan stood on the porch of his cabin coffee cup, cradled in his weathered hands, watching the sun claim the day. He had slept little, his mind too full of all that had transpired, his senses too alert for any approach. Inside, Grace and the children slept. For a moment, standing there as birds began their morning songs, Ethan could almost imagine this was his normal, a family under his roof. Responsibilities beyond the fences and fields, a purpose beyond mere survival. The fantasy faded as quickly as the morning mist. These people weren't his, not truly. They were refugees, wounded souls who had landed on his doorstep by chance or fate. Once Grace healed, they would continue westward to Oregon, to the brother-in-law who waited there. And Ethan would return to his solitude, perhaps more haunted than before, for having glimpsed what might have been. The thought settled in his chest, like a cold stone. Movement inside the cabin drew him back. Lily was awake, tending to the twins with her usual quiet efficiency. She glanced up as Ethan entered, acknowledging him with a solemn nod that seemed to belong to someone much older than her 5 years. "Good morning, Mr. Ward," she said, her voice soft, so as not to wake her mother. "Morning," he replied, moving to the stove. "Hungry?" She nodded again, and Ethan set about preparing breakfast. There was something soothing in the routine, the simple tasks of feeding the fire, mixing batter for cornbread, slicing bacon. As he worked, he was aware of Lily's eyes on him, studying his movements with careful attention. "You cook good," she observed when he set a plate before her. "Like Mama." Ethan sat across from her with his own plate. "Had to learn. Been on my own a long time." Lily took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "Because your family went to heaven." The question delivered with such directness caught Ethan off guard. He set his fork down, meeting the child's gaze. "Yes, my papa went to heaven too." Lily continued eating as if discussing the weather. "The bad men pushed him. Mama doesn't think I know, but I saw from the window." A chill ran through Ethan. "You saw your father die." Lily nodded matter-of-factly. "He was at the big house, on the balcony with Grandfather. They were yelling. Then Grandfather's friend pushed Papa, and he fell." She set her fork down, looked up at Ethan with those two old eyes. "Grandfather saw me watching. That's when I knew we had to run." The revelation stunned Ethan into silence. This child had witnessed her father's murder, carried that knowledge while also bearing the weight of helping her mother escape. The burden seemed impossibly heavy for such small shoulders. "Does your mother know you saw this?" he asked finally. Lily shook her head. "She was with the babies. I didn't tell her. It would make her sad." Ethan reached across the table, gently covering the girl's small hand with his own. "You've been very brave, Lily. But some things are too heavy to carry alone." She looked down at his hand covering hers, then back up to his face. "Are you carrying heavy things alone, Mr. Ward?" The question pierced him like a bullet, clean and true. Before he could formulate a response, Grace's voice came from the bed. "Lily has a gift for asking the questions adults avoid." Ethan turned to see Grace watching them, her face pale but her eyes clear. She had propped herself up slightly against the pillows, mindful of her splinted legs. "Mama!" Lily was off her chair in an instant, rushing to her mother's side. "Mr. Ward made breakfast. Are you hungry? Can I bring you some?" Grace stroked her daughter's hair. "That would be lovely, sweetheart." As Lily busied herself preparing a plate, Ethan moved to Grace's side, checking her splints and bandages. "How's the pain? Bearable with Martha's medicine?" Her eyes held his for a moment. "Thank you for getting it. For all of this." Ethan nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Fever's down. That's good." "I heard what Lily told you," Grace said quietly, so her daughter couldn't hear. "About what she saw." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She needs to tell you properly, when she's ready." "I know." Grace's eyes followed her daughter across the room. "She's had to grow up too quickly." The day settled into a rhythm unlike any Ethan had known in years. Between tending to his usual farm chores, he found himself changing diapers, warming milk for the twins, helping Grace move into a more comfortable position. Lily was his constant shadow, asking questions about everything: how the water pump worked, why the chickens laid eggs without a rooster, where the sun went at night. By afternoon, a decision weighed on Ethan's mind. Tomorrow was Sunday, and Martha's words about attending church services echoed in his thoughts. Under normal circumstances, he would have dismissed the idea outright. He hadn't stepped foot in Redemption's church since the funeral for Emma, and Sarah couldn't bear the pitying glances and whispered condolences. But circumstances were far from normal now. Grace needed proper medical attention that he couldn't provide. The twins needed supplies he hadn't thought to purchase. And there was something else, something Martha had implied, but not stated directly, that Reverend Thomas might be an ally in their situation. "We need to go to town tomorrow," he said at last, as the afternoon light slanted golden through the windows. "To the church?" Grace looked up sharply from where she sat, propped in bed, mending one of Lily's dresses. "That's too dangerous. Caldwell will have people watching." "Which is why it's the last place he'll expect you to be," Ethan countered. "Hiding in plain sight. Besides, your legs need a doctor's examination, and we can speak with Reverend Thomas." "Thomas?" Grace's expression darkened. "He's firmly in Caldwell's pocket. Has been for years." Ethan frowned. Martha seemed to think he might help. "Martha believes the best of people even when evidence suggests otherwise." Grace set her sewing aside. "Reverend Thomas presided over my wedding to Michael, then gave the eulogy at his funeral without once suggesting his death was anything but an accident. He knows which side his bread is buttered on." The bitterness in her voice was palpable, but Ethan pressed on. "Even so, appearing publicly will establish that you're under my protection. Makes it harder for Caldwell to act openly against you." Grace studied him, doubt evident in her eyes. "Or it makes us easier targets." "We can't hide forever," Ethan said quietly. "Sooner or later, Caldwell will look here. Better to show strength now than weakness later." A long silence followed as Grace considered his words. Finally she nodded, though reluctance showed in every line of her body. Very well, but the children stay close to us at all times. Of course. Ethan hesitated, then added, There's something else we should discuss. Lily told me she witnessed her father's death. Grace's face drained of color. What? No, that's impossible. She was with me when it happened. She says she saw it from a window. Saw Caldwell and another man on a balcony with Michael. Saw the other man push him. Grace's hands trembled as she pressed them against her mouth. Dear God, she whispered. All this time she's been carrying that alone. She didn't want to add to your burden. Ethan's voice softened. She's protecting you just as you're protecting her. Tears welled in Grace's eyes, spilling over. My poor girl. My brave, brave girl. Ethan looked away, uncomfortable with her raw emotion. She'll tell you when she's ready. Don't force it. Grace wiped her tears, composing herself, as they heard Lily's footsteps approaching from outside, where she had been collecting eggs from the hen house. Thank you for telling me. Lily entered with a small basket of eggs, her face lighting with pride as she displayed her contribution to the household. Look, Mama, I found 6. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Grace said, opening her arms to embrace her daughter. As she held Lily close, her eyes met Ethan's over the child's head, a world of unspoken grief and gratitude passing between them. That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan and Grace talked in low voices by the fire. She told him more about her life growing up as the niece of Judge Caldwell's wife, being treated as somewhere between family and servant in the grand house on the hill overlooking Redemption. When Aunt Margaret died, I thought the judge would send me away. Grace said, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the quilt covering her legs. Instead, he began suggesting I should consider marriage to Michael, his stepson from his second marriage. Michael was kind, intelligent, studying to be a lawyer. The match made political sense for the judge. It kept me under his influence and gave Michael connections to my aunt's family. But you actually fell in love, Ethan observed. A small smile touched Grace's lips. Yes, despite the judge's machinations, we truly did. Michael was nothing like his stepfather. He believed in justice, in doing what was right. Her expression clouded. That's what got him killed. Ethan added another log to the fire, watching the sparks rise. The documents he found, what exactly did they contain? Grace's voice dropped even lower. Proof that Judge Caldwell has been systematically forcing farmers off their land for years. Forged deeds, falsified bank records, evidence of bribes to local officials. He's been building a timber empire using underhanded tactics, acquiring the best forested properties across 3 counties. Including mine, Ethan said, understanding dawning. My north section has the oldest growth pine in the region. Grace nodded. Your name was specifically mentioned. According to the records Michael found, you were next on the list for persuasion. The pieces were falling into place. The increasingly aggressive offers for his land, the suspicious accidents that had befallen his livestock, the veiled threats from the sheriff about troublemakers not being welcome in Redemption. Where are these documents now? Hidden, Grace replied. Somewhere only I can access. It's safer if you don't know. Ethan accepted this with a nod, though the strategist in him, the part that had kept him alive through the war, wanted every detail. Fair enough, but tomorrow at church we need to present a united front. No uncertainty, no fear. If Caldwell or his men are watching, they need to see that you're not alone anymore. Grace held his gaze, searching. Why are you doing this, Ethan? The truth this time. It's more than just a common enemy. Ethan looked away into the dancing flames. The question deserved an honest answer, but finding the words was harder than he expected. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion long suppressed. 5 years ago, I made a choice. The Petersons needed help securing their barn before a storm. I went telling Emma I'd be back before dark. His hands clenched into fists. The fire started in the kitchen. By the time I returned, the roof had collapsed. They said Emma was trying to reach Sarah's room when it happened. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. When Ethan continued, his voice had dropped to barely a whisper. I made the wrong choice that day. Chose neighbors over family. Afterward, I couldn't bear to be around people. Reminded me too much of what I'd lost, what I'd failed to protect. He finally looked back at Grace. Then you and Lily and the twins appeared on my road. And Lily said those words, "From now on, you are our father," like it was already decided. And you couldn't turn away, Grace said softly. No, Ethan admitted, because for the first time in 5 years, someone needed me specifically. Not just any helpful neighbor, but me. It felt like, he struggled for the right words, like a chance to make a different choice this time. Grace's expression softened with understanding. Redemption. The word hung between them heavy with meaning, both the town's name and the concept itself, the possibility of atonement for past failures. Ethan didn't confirm or deny it, but his silence was answer enough. Get some rest, he said, finally rising from his chair. Tomorrow will test us all. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed to mock their tension. Ethan hitched the horses to the wagon while Lily helped her mother dress in her cleanest gown. The twins, fed and changed, were wrapped snugly in blankets, their small faces peaceful in sleep. Loading Grace into the wagon proved challenging. Her splinted legs made it impossible for her to climb up on her own, and the pain of being moved drew sharp gasps from her lips, despite her attempts to remain stoic. In the end, Ethan had to lift her bodily as gently as possible and place her on a pallet of blankets in the wagon bed. I'm sorry, he murmured, seeing the sheen of sweat on her brow from the ordeal. Grace managed a tight smile. Not your fault. The scenery is worth it. I've been staring at the same cabin ceiling for days. Lily scrambled up beside her mother, arranging the twins' blankets and her own skirt with careful attention to appearance. She wore her hair in 2 neat braids tied with scraps of ribbon Grace had found among her meager possessions. We look proper, Lily announced with satisfaction. Yes, you do, Ethan agreed, touched by the child's pride. He himself had done his best with his appearance, donning a clean shirt and his one good coat, trimming his beard and slicking back his hair with water. It had been years since he'd made such an effort, and the unfamiliar sensation of being properly groomed made him feel exposed, vulnerable somehow. The journey to town passed in tense silence. As they crested the final hill overlooking Redemption, the white steeple of the church came into view, its bell already ringing to summon worshippers. Wagons and horses filled the street before it, families in their Sunday best making their way inside. Ethan felt Grace's anxiety radiating from the wagon bed. Remember, he said without turning head high. No fear. He guided the wagon to a spot near the church steps, deliberately visible from the street and the courthouse beyond. As he helped Grace down, cradling her carefully in his arms, he was acutely aware of the stairs turning their way. Whispers spread through the gathering crowd like ripples in a pond. Lily followed, carrying one twin, while Ethan balanced the other in the crook of his arm. Together, they made a tableau that caught every eye: the reclusive widower, the injured young woman, the solemn child, the infant twins. It couldn't have drawn more attention if they'd planned it. Reverend Thomas stood at the church door greeting his flock. His eyes widened almost comically as he saw them approach, recognition and shock warring on his thin face. "Mr. Ward," he stammered, "this is unexpected. And Mrs. Sullivan, we thought, that is, we heard, that I'd fled town," Grace supplied, her voice carrying clearly. "I've been recuperating from my injuries at Mr. Ward's farm. He's been kind enough to take us in during this difficult time." The Reverend's gaze darted from Grace to Ethan, then to the courthouse visible across the town square. "I see. How fortunate." Ethan met the man's nervous glance steadily. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, doesn't he, Reverend?" "Indeed, indeed." Thomas stepped aside, gesturing them in. "Please join us. It's been too long since you attended services, Mr. Ward." Inside the church fell silent as Ethan carried Grace down the aisle. He chose a pew near the front, deliberately placing them in full view of the congregation. As he settled Grace beside him, positioning her legs carefully on the polished wood, the silence gave way to a buzz of whispers. From the corner of his eye, Ethan spotted Sheriff Davis entering the church, his expression thunderous as he caught sight of them. The lawman made his way to a side pew, never taking his eyes off Grace and the children. "The sheriff's here," Ethan murmured to Grace, looking none too pleased. "He's Caldwell's right hand," she replied quietly. "Has been since they served together in the Mexican War." Lily sat rigidly beside Ethan, her back straight, chin lifted in unconscious mimicry of her mother's posture. She held one twin in her lap, while Ethan cradled the other. To anyone observing, they might have appeared to be a family unusual in circumstance, perhaps, but a family nonetheless. Reverend Thomas took his place at the pulpit, visibly collecting himself before beginning the service. His sermon ironically centered on the parable of the Good Samaritan, the duty of Christians to help those in need, regardless of circumstance. As the Reverend spoke, Ethan became aware of a new presence in the church. A tall, imposing figure had entered quietly through a side door and taken a seat in the rear pew. Even without turning, Ethan knew who it was. The sudden tension in Grace's body confirmed it. Judge Harlan Caldwell had arrived. The judge was in his 60s, silver-haired, and distinguished in appearance, with the bearing of a man accustomed to commanding respect. His tailored suit and gold watch chain marked him as wealthy among the more modest farmers and merchants of Redemption. "He's here," Grace whispered, her voice tight with fear, despite her earlier resolve. "I know," Ethan replied. "Don't look back. Focus on the service." Lily pressed closer to Ethan's side, her small body trembling slightly. "The bad man," she breathed so softly only Ethan could hear. He placed his free arm around her shoulders, a gesture of protection that felt as natural as it was unexpected. "You're safe," he told her quietly. "I'm right here." The remainder of the service passed in a haze of tension. Ethan was aware of every movement, every whisper, his senses heightened as they had been during the war. When the final hymn concluded and Reverend Thomas delivered the benediction, he knew the real test was about to begin. People filed out of the pews, some deliberately taking routes that brought them past where Ethan and Grace sat. Curious eyes assessed them, judgments forming behind polite nods. Ethan recognized Joshua Reed among them, the storekeeper giving him a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Martha Quinn appeared at Grace's side, her weathered face creased with concern. "You shouldn't have come," she said bluntly, though her hands were gentle as she checked Grace's splints. "But since you're here, let me see these legs properly." "Is Dr. Wilson present?" Ethan asked. Martha snorted. "In his pew as always, but he won't help. Not with Caldwell watching." She lowered her voice. "The judge called an emergency meeting of the town council this morning," declared Grace, mentally unstable. "Claimed she kidnapped the twins after suffering a breakdown following Michael's death." Grace's face paled. He can't do that. There are legal procedures. Legal means nothing when the law is in his pocket, Martha interrupted. He's appointed himself temporary guardian of the twins with the council's blessing. Sheriff has papers authorizing him to take them into protective custody. Ethan's jaw tightened. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. The deep voice came from behind them. Judge Caldwell stood in the aisle, Sheriff Davis at his side. The judge's expression was one of practiced concern, but his eyes were cold as winter ice. "Grace, my dear," Caldwell said, his tone solicitous. "We've been so worried, after the tragic accident with your legs, to disappear with the children like that." He shook his head sorrowfully. "It's understandable, of course. Grief affects us all differently." Grace's hands clenched in her lap, but her voice remained steady. "There was no accident, Judge. Your men broke my legs when I refused to give you my children." A ripple of shock went through the remaining congregants. Caldwell's expression never faltered, though something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "You see," he said to those nearby, "this is precisely what concerns us. These delusions, these accusations. It's why the council has determined the twins should be in more stable care while Grace recovers." Sheriff Davis stepped forward, hand on his pistol. "Mrs. Sullivan, we have papers authorizing—" "Those children aren't going anywhere," Ethan interrupted, standing slowly. Though he was unarmed in church, his stance radiated dangerous capability. "Mrs. Sullivan and her family are under my protection." The judge's gaze shifted to Ethan, assessing. "Mr. Ward, your reputation precedes you. A tragic history, as I recall. Fire, wasn't it, wife and child?" His voice dripped with false sympathy. "Perhaps that explains your interference in matters that don't concern you." The barb struck true, but Ethan didn't flinch. "Your business with Mrs. Sullivan became my concern when your men left her to die on my property." "A serious accusation," Caldwell replied smoothly. "Without proof, I'm afraid." Lily stood suddenly, her small figure rigid with determination. "I saw you," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the hushed church. "I saw you and the other man push my papa off the balcony." The silence that followed was absolute. Caldwell stared at the child, momentarily thrown off balance. "What did you say, girl? I saw you kill my papa," Lily repeated, her voice unwavering despite the slight tremor in her hands. "You saw me watching. That's why you want to take us away. Because I know what you did." Caldwell recovered quickly, his expression morphing into one of pitying concern. "The poor child," he said to the onlookers. "You see how this delusion has infected even the little one, a tragic example of how a mother's instability affects her children." But the damage was done. Doubt had crept into the faces of those watching. A child's direct accusation carried weight that adult conflicts did not, especially delivered with such clear conviction. Martha Quinn stepped between Lily and the judge. "I delivered those twins," she announced loudly. "I've known Grace since she was no higher than this girl. There's nothing unstable about her except her trust in those who don't deserve it." Sheriff Davis moved forward, hand still on his pistol. "Stand aside, Martha. I have legal papers." "Your papers mean nothing in God's house," came a new voice. Reverend Thomas had emerged from the vestry, his clerical collar stark against his black coat. "No child will be forcibly removed from its mother within these walls." Surprise flickered across Grace's face. Ethan, too, was taken aback by the Reverend's sudden backbone. Caldwell's expression darkened dangerously. "Thomas, you forget yourself," the judge warned. "No, sir. I've forgotten myself for too long." The Reverend's voice gained strength. "I've stood silent while you've bent this town to your will. I conducted Michael Sullivan's funeral, knowing full well his death was no accident, yet said nothing for fear of your influence." He straightened to his full height. "I will not compound that sin by allowing you to separate these children from their mother." A murmur ran through the church. The Reverend's words had cast the situation in a new light, lending credence to Grace's claims. Caldwell's carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel. The judge's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing the rage beneath. Then it was gone, replaced by a cold smile. "Very well. If that's your position, so be it." He straightened his coat. "But this isn't over. The law will take its course." He turned to Ethan, voice lowering so only those closest could hear. "You've made a grave mistake, Ward. Perhaps you should ask Grace about her family connections before you throw your lot in with hers. She's not what she seems." With that cryptic statement, Caldwell turned and strode out of the church, Sheriff Davis following reluctantly behind. The remaining congregants stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. Ethan knelt beside Grace, concern evident in his face. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her complexion was ashen. "What did he mean about my family?" "A tactic," Ethan replied, "trying to sow doubt between us." Yet something in Caldwell's tone had given him pause. There had been too much certainty in the judge's words, as if he held knowledge that would change everything. Reverend Thomas approached his earlier courage, seemingly depleted, leaving him looking tired and much older. "You should leave quickly," he advised. "The judge won't give up so easily." "Thank you for what you did," Grace said, genuine gratitude in her voice. The Reverend shook his head. "Don't thank me. I should have spoken up long ago when Michael first came to me with his concerns." Regret lined his face. "My silence makes me complicit in what followed." "You spoke up today," Ethan pointed out. "That counts for something." "Perhaps." Thomas didn't sound convinced. "But the judge is right about one thing: this isn't over. He'll find another approach, legal or otherwise." Martha, who had been examining Grace's splints, straightened up. "The legs are healing well enough, but she needs proper rest. Get her back to the farm and keep her still." She looked at Ethan meaningfully. "And keep watch tonight. Caldwell won't wait long to make his next move." As Ethan carried Grace back to the wagon, the weight of her in his arms felt different, somehow more personal, more significant. The public stand they had taken had irrevocably linked their fates. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Lily walked beside them, head held high despite the whispers and stares. She had shed the last vestiges of childhood today, standing up to her father's killer with a courage that humbled Ethan. The twins remarkably had slept through the entire confrontation, their innocent faces untouched by the darkness surrounding them. Once Grace was settled in the wagon, Ethan turned to find Joshua Reed at his side, speaking in a hushed tone. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Ward," the storekeeper said. "But you should know not everyone in town bends to Caldwell's will. Some of us have been waiting for someone to stand up to him." He pressed a folded piece of paper into Ethan's hand. "If trouble comes, send word to this address. You'll find friends ready to help." Before Ethan could respond, Reed melted back into the dispersing crowd. Ethan pocketed the paper without examining it, climbed onto the wagon seat, and took up the reins. As they drove away from the church, he felt the weight of eyes following them, some hostile, some curious, some perhaps even supportive. The simple errand to attend Sunday services had evolved into a public declaration of war against the most powerful man in the county. Grace's voice came softly from behind him. "I've put you in terrible danger." I was already in it, Ethan replied, keeping his eyes on the road. Just didn't know how deep. They rode in silence for a time, each lost in thought. Finally, as the town receded behind them and the open prairie stretched ahead, Grace asked, "What did the judge mean about my family?" Ethan considered deflecting again, but decided against it. Trust had to work both ways. "I don't know, but if there's anything you haven't told me that could matter now, would be the time." Grace was quiet so long that Ethan thought she might not answer. When she did, her voice was barely audible over the creaking wagon wheels. "My mother was Rebecca Quinn," she said. Ethan frowned, connecting the name. Quinn like Martha. "Her younger sister. My mother married against her family's wishes a man named James Harlow. He wasn't a good man. Drank, gambled, disappeared for months at a time." Grace's voice grew distant with memory. "When I was 4, he lost everything in a card game to Judge Caldwell, including our house. We were about to be evicted when my mother discovered she had a claim to some valuable property through her grandfather." Ethan listened intently, sensing they were approaching something significant. Before she could assert the claim, there was an accident. A fall down the stairs. My father was home at the time, but he claimed he was asleep. Grace's hands twisted in her lap. She died 3 days later. My father disappeared, and I was sent to live with my Aunt Margaret, who had married the judge after his first wife died. The pieces were starting to come together. The property your mother was claiming was eventually acquired by Caldwell through what he claimed was a legal settlement with my father, who conveniently reappeared just long enough to sign the papers. Grace's eyes met his. It was the initial cornerstone of his timber empire, the most valuable stand of old-growth pine in 3 counties. "Your north section," Lily piped up suddenly. Ethan nearly pulled the horses to a halt, twisting to look at them. "What?" Grace nodded slowly. "My mother's claim was to land that now forms the northern section of your farm, Ethan. The land Caldwell has been trying to buy from you for years." The revelation hit Ethan like a physical blow. That's why he's so determined to get it. Not just for the timber, but because if the original theft ever came to light, it could unravel everything he's built since, Grace finished. That's what Michael discovered in those documents. Not just recent land grabs, but the original crime that started it all. Ethan faced forward again, mind racing. "And now, Caldwell thinks you know about it." "I do know about it. So did Michael." Grace's voice hardened. "It's why he died. It's why the judge wants the twins under his control and Lily and me silenced." The implications were staggering. What had seemed like a simple refuge for a woman and her children had evolved into something far more complex. A decades-old web of theft, murder, and corruption, with Caldwell at its center. "The documents Michael found," Ethan said slowly, "they could prove all this." "Yes. Bank records correspondence between Caldwell and my father, the original property deed in my mother's name." Grace's voice lowered, "Enough to ruin the judge and see him imprisoned if it reached the right authorities." Ethan processed this information, its weight settling on his shoulders. His farm, his sanctuary, had been built on stolen land that rightfully belonged to Grace's family. The thought was difficult to reconcile with everything he believed about his home. As if reading his thoughts, Grace added softly, "You've worked this land for years, Ethan. Made it thrive. I don't blame you for any of this." They crested the final hill before Ethan's property came into view. The sight that greeted them drove all other thoughts from his mind. 3 riders were circling the cabin, torches in hand. "Get down!" Ethan commanded, pulling the wagon to an abrupt halt behind the cover of a stand of trees. "Stay here." Without waiting for a response, he leapt from the wagon and ran to the barn, where he kept his rifle. The distance was too great for a clear shot, but he could make it to the creek bed that ran along the eastern edge of his property. From there, he'd have cover and a clear line of sight to the cabin. As he ran, crouched low to avoid detection, Ethan's mind calculated distances, angles, the number of adversaries. 3 visible, possibly more inside. They hadn't set the cabin ablaze yet, which meant they were likely searching for something the documents most likely. He reached the creek bed and moved swiftly along it, water soaking his Sunday boots. The riders had dismounted now, one standing guard outside, while the other 2 entered the cabin. Ethan raised his rifle, steadying it against a tree trunk, and took careful aim at the man outside. The shot cracked across the prairie. The guard dropped, clutching his leg. The other 2 men burst from the cabin, weapons drawn, scanning for the source of the attack. Ethan fired again, deliberately missing, but close enough to send them diving for cover. He wanted them running, not fighting. A pitched battle risked setting the cabin ablaze, and after losing one home to fire, he couldn't bear to watch another burn. His strategy worked. The uninjured men helped their wounded companion onto his horse, then mounted their own. Within moments, they were galloping away, heading in the direction of town. Ethan waited until they were well out of sight before emerging from the creek bed. He approached the cabin, cautiously, rifle ready, checking for any signs of remaining danger. Finding none, he entered, surveying the damage. The interior had been ransacked. Furniture overturned, his few possessions, scattered floorboards pried up in places. They had been searching methodically, tearing apart his home in pursuit of the documents Grace had mentioned. Anger rose in Ethan's throat, hot and choking. This place, sparse though it was, represented everything he had rebuilt after losing Emma and Sarah. The violation of it struck deeper than he would have expected. He returned to the wagon where Grace waited with fear evident on her face. "They're gone," he told her. But they tore apart the cabin looking for something. "The documents," she said, confirmation rather than question. "Yes." Ethan helped her down from the wagon, cradling her against his chest. "Were they here?" "No," Grace replied. "Never. I wouldn't have put you at risk that way." Relief mingled with the anger still coursing through him. "Good, but this changes things. We can't stay here tonight. Caldwell will send more men once those 3 report back." "Where will we go?" Lily asked, clutching one twin to her chest, while Ethan balanced Grace and the other child. Ethan considered their options. They couldn't go to town. Caldwell's influence was too pervasive. They needed somewhere safe, somewhere unexpected. He remembered the paper Joshua Reed had pressed into his hand. Retrieving it, he unfolded it to find an address and a name. Thomas Peterson. "The Petersons," he murmured, memory stirring. "You know them?" Grace asked. "Yes." Ethan's throat tightened with the weight of the past. "They were the neighbors I was helping the night my family died." Twilight deepened around them as Ethan guided the wagon down a narrow, tree-lined lane. The Peterson farm lay 3 miles east of his own property, nestled in a shallow valley that offered some protection from the harsh prairie winds. He hadn't traveled this road in 5 years, had deliberately avoided it, like a man skirting the edges of an open grave. Grace sensed his discomfort. "These people, the Petersons, they're connected to what happened to your family." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "I was helping Thomas secure their barn before a storm the night my house caught fire." The words came out clipped, mechanical. "If I'd been home instead—" He didn't need to finish. The implication hung in the air between them, heavy as a thundercloud. "You couldn't have known," Grace said softly. "Doesn't change what happened." Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Haven't spoken to them since the funeral. Thomas tried to reach out, But He shook his head. Couldn't face him. Lily, who had been listening quietly from beside her mother, spoke up. Were they your friends? The question, simple and direct, caught Ethan off guard. Yes, he admitted after a moment. Good friends. Thomas and I fought in the same regiment during the war. When we both returned to Nebraska afterward, he helped me build my cabin. Then they'll help us now, Lily said, with the unshakable confidence of childhood. Ethan wished he could share her certainty. 5 years of silence lay between him and the Petersons, 5 years of blame he'd directed at himself, but that might have splashed onto them as well. Would they welcome him now, especially with 3 children and an injured woman in tow, and the shadow of Judge Caldwell looming behind them? As the wagon crested a small rise, the Peterson farmhouse came into view. A sturdy 2-story structure with a wide front porch light glowing warmly from its windows against the gathering darkness. A well-established orchard spread to one side, the trees just beginning to bud with spring's promise. On the other stood a large barn and several outbuildings, evidence of a prosperous operation. Ethan drew the wagon to a halt at the edge of the yard, suddenly hesitant. Maybe this isn't Ethan Ward, a man's voice called from the direction of the barn. That really you? Thomas Peterson emerged into the fading light, wiping his hands on a rag. He was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, his once red hair now liberally streaked with gray, his face weathered by sun and wind. He approached the wagon slowly, as if afraid Ethan might bolt if startled. "Thomas," Ethan acknowledged, climbing down from the seat. The 2 men stood facing each other, 5 years of unspoken words stretching between them. Then Thomas stepped forward and embraced Ethan in a rough hug that spoke of relief and forgiveness all at once. "Thought you might never find your way here again," Thomas said when he stepped back, emotion making his voice gruff. "Wouldn't have except for necessity," Ethan admitted. He gestured toward the wagon. "We need help, Thomas. A place to stay for the night, at least." Thomas peered past him, taking in the sight of Grace, propped up in the wagon bed, the twins bundled beside her, Lily, watching warily from her mother's side. "Joshua Reed sent word you might be coming," he said. "Said you'd stirred up a hornet's nest in town today." His gaze lingered on Grace's splinted legs. "This the woman Caldwell's been hunting?" "Yes, Grace Sullivan, her daughter Lily, and the twins Emma and Jacob," Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "Reed said you stood up to the judge right in the middle of church." A slow smile spread across his face. "Wish I'd been there to see it." "You don't attend services?" Ethan asked, surprised. "Not since Sarah Caldwell took over as head of the church council 3 years back. The judge's daughter-in-law has opinions about who's welcome in God's house." Thomas glanced at Grace again. "Though I hear Reverend Thomas finally found his backbone today." Before Ethan could respond, the farmhouse door opened, spilling more light into the yard. A woman stood silhouetted in the doorway. "Thomas, who are you talking to out there?" "It's Ethan Hanna," Thomas called back. "Ethan Ward, and he's brought guests." Hannah Peterson hurried down the porch steps, a shawl clutched around her shoulders against the evening chill. She was a small woman with a kind face and eyes that had seen their share of hardship. Those eyes widened when she recognized Ethan, then immediately filled with tears. "Oh, Ethan," she said, her voice catching. "It's been so long?" Ethan stood awkwardly, uncertain how to respond to her emotion. Before he could formulate words, Hannah had reached the wagon and caught sight of its occupants. "Good heavens!" she exclaimed, taking in Grace's condition and the children. "Thomas helped me get them inside. The poor woman looks exhausted, and those babies need to be in a proper bed." Her practical concern broke the tension. Within minutes, Thomas was carrying Grace into the house while Hannah fussed over the twins. Lily stayed close to Ethan, her small hand finding his as they followed the Petersons inside. The farmhouse was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of fresh bread and stew. Hannah directed Thomas to place Grace on a sofa in the parlor, then bustled about arranging pillows and blankets to make her comfortable. "The children can use the spare bedroom upstairs," she told Ethan. "And you can have the boys' old room. They're both gone now. William married last spring and James works for the railroad in Omaha." "We don't want to impose," Grace began, but Hannah waved away her protest. "Nonsense! Any friend of Ethan's is welcome here." She turned to Lily with a gentle smile. "Would you like some milk and cookies, sweetheart? You must be hungry after all that excitement." Lily looked to her mother for permission, then to Ethan before nodding shyly. As Hannah led Lily toward the kitchen, Thomas gestured for Ethan to join him on the porch. Outside, the first stars had appeared in the deepening blue of the sky, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of spring earth and growing things. "Reed said Caldwell's men tore up your place," Thomas said without preamble. "Looking for something important." Ethan nodded, unsurprised that the news had traveled so quickly. "Documents that could prove the judge has been stealing land for years, that he had Michael Sullivan, Grace's husband, murdered for discovering the truth." Thomas let out a low whistle. "That's a powerful accusation." "It gets worse," Ethan continued. "The land theft started with property that should have belonged to Grace's mother. Property that now makes up part of my farm." Understanding dawned on Thomas's face. "So that's why Caldwell's been so set on buying you out all these years. It wasn't just the timber." "No, he's been trying to cover his tracks." If anyone ever questioned the original acquisition, Ethan left the implication hanging. Thomas leaned against a porch post, considering. "What's your plan now?" The direct question caught Ethan off guard. He hadn't thought beyond finding immediate safety. "I don't know," he admitted. "Keep them safe until Grace heals enough to travel, I suppose. She has family in Oregon." "And then what? Return to your solitude?" There was no judgment in Thomas's tone, only genuine curiosity. Ethan looked through the window where he could see Grace watching Hannah and Lily in the kitchen, a soft smile on her face, as the child carefully helped set the table. Something twisted in his chest, longing mingled with fear. "I don't know," he repeated more quietly. Thomas studied him for a long moment. 5 years is a long time to punish yourself, Ethan." Anger flared in Ethan's gut, quick and defensive. "I'm not—" "You are," Thomas interrupted gently. "I know because I did the same after losing my brothers in the war. Blamed myself for surviving when they didn't." He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "What happened to Emma and Sarah wasn't your fault. Fire happens. You couldn't have known." "I should have been there," Ethan insisted, the old wound reopening. "Maybe, but you weren't. And torturing yourself won't bring them back." Thomas squeezed his shoulder once before releasing it. "But maybe helping that woman and her children can give you something you've been missing." Before Ethan could respond, Hannah called them in for a late supper. The conversation around the table was carefully neutral farm matters, weather forecasts, news of Thomas and Hannah's grown sons. Lily remained close to Ethan, occasionally looking to him for reassurance in these unfamiliar surroundings. After the meal, while Hannah settled the twins in the spare room and helped Grace prepare for sleep, Thomas and Ethan sat by the fire with coffee laced with whiskey. "What do you know about the Reeds?" Ethan asked, thinking of the storekeeper's offer of help. "Joshua's solid. His wife Caroline even more so. They've never much cared for Caldwell's influence over the town. Joshua's father stood against the judge years ago when he tried to force through a new property tax, that would have hurt the small farmers. Thomas swirled his coffee thoughtfully. There are others in Redemption who feel the same way, people who've lost land or livelihoods to Caldwell's schemes, but were too afraid to speak up. Until now, Ethan supplied. Maybe. Thomas leaned forward, lowering his voice, although they were alone. Reed mentioned something else in his message. Said Reverend Thomas is staying with them tonight, afraid to return to the parsonage after standing up to the judge. Ethan raised his eyebrows. The Reverend's in that deep. Apparently, according to Reed, he's had proof of Caldwell's corruption for years, but was too frightened to act on it. Your public stand today gave him the courage to finally speak up. This was unexpected information. If the Reverend had evidence that could corroborate what was in Michael's documents, we need to talk to him, Ethan decided. Thomas nodded. Reed suggested the same, said to bring Grace's proof to their place tomorrow night. Seems there's to be a gathering of like-minded citizens. A plan was forming in Ethan's mind, risky, perhaps, but with the potential to end Caldwell's reign once and for all. He would need to discuss it with Grace, understand exactly what the documents contained and where they were hidden. As if summoned by his thoughts, Hannah appeared in the doorway. Grace is asking for you, Ethan. He found Grace propped up on the sofa, her face drawn with pain and exhaustion, but her eyes clear. Lily was already asleep in an armchair nearby, covered with a quilt, her features peaceful in a way Ethan hadn't seen before. How are you feeling? He asked softly, taking a seat beside Grace. Better for being somewhere safe, she replied. The Petersons are good people. Yes. Ethan hesitated, then added, they were good friends once. I shut them out after the fire. Understanding softened Grace's expression. Like you shut out everyone? It wasn't a question, but Ethan nodded anyway. Seemed easier than facing them, than facing anyone. Grace's hand found his, her touch light but steady. Grief does strange things to us all. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, connected by the simple touch of hands and the shared understanding of loss. Then Ethan reluctantly brought up the matter at hand. Thomas says Joshua Reed is organizing a meeting tomorrow night. People from town who oppose Caldwell, who might stand with us if we have proof of his crimes. He met her gaze directly. We need the documents, Grace. She withdrew her hand, something like fear flickering across her face. It's dangerous. If Caldwell knew where they were, he already suspects you have them. That's why he sent men to search my cabin. Ethan leaned closer, his voice urgent but gentle. This may be our only chance to gather enough support to stand against him. To end this. Grace closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, resolve had replaced the fear. The documents are hidden at Martha Quinn's house, she said, in a false bottom of the trunk that belonged to my mother. Martha kept it for me all these years. Ethan nodded slowly. Can you write a note authorizing Martha to give them to me? I'll go first thing in the morning. Grace agreed, though concern still shadowed her eyes. As Hannah provided paper and pen, Ethan found himself watching Grace's hands as she wrote, delicate but strong, much like the woman herself. In just a few days, she had come to occupy a space in his thoughts that had been empty for years. The realization was both frightening and exhilarating. That night, in the unfamiliar comfort of the Petersons' guest room, Ethan lay awake long after the household had fallen silent. The events of the past days played through his mind like scenes from a strange dream. The appearance of Grace and her children on his road, the confrontation at the church, the attack on his cabin, and now this tentative plan to challenge Caldwell's power. How had his quiet, isolated existence transformed so completely in less than a week? Thomas's words echoed in his mind, 5 years is a long time to punish yourself. Was that what he'd been doing, punishing himself for a tragedy he couldn't have prevented? And if so, what did it mean that he was now willing to risk everything for Grace and her children? Sleep eluded him until the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the curtains. He rose quietly dressed and made his way downstairs. To his surprise, Thomas was already up, stoking the kitchen fire. "Thought you might be an early riser still," Thomas said, not turning around. "Coffee's almost ready." "I need to get to town," Ethan replied, "to Martha Quinn's place." Thomas nodded. "Expected as much. Take my horse, she's faster than your wagon team, and speed might matter today." He finally turned his expression serious. "Caldwell won't be idle after yesterday. He'll be looking for you, for all of you." "I know." Ethan accepted the cup of coffee Thomas offered. "How much danger are you and Hannah in for sheltering us?" Thomas shrugged. "No more than we've courted before. The judge and I have history. He tried to buy our orchard land 3 years ago, sent the sheriff to investigate non-existent complaints about our water usage when I refused." A grim smile crossed his face. "I've been waiting for a chance to properly thank him for the attention." After a quick breakfast, Ethan prepared to leave. Grace had woken and came to see him off, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but her expression determined. "Be careful," she said, pressing the letter for Martha into his hand. "If anything seems wrong, anything at all, don't take chances. The documents aren't worth your life." Her concern warmed something in Ethan's chest. "I'll be back before midday," he promised. Thomas's horse was indeed swift, eating up the miles to redemption with ground-devouring strides. Ethan approached the town cautiously, avoiding the main street and making his way to Martha's house through back lanes and garden paths. The widow answered his knock immediately, as if she'd been waiting for him. "Took you long enough?" she said by way of greeting, ushering him inside. "I've been expecting you since yesterday." "We went to the Petersons," Ethan explained, handing her Grace's letter. "Grace said you have documents hidden here, in her mother's trunk." Martha read the note quickly, then nodded. "Follow me." She led him to a small bedroom at the back of the house, where a battered leather trunk stood at the foot of the bed. Martha knelt with surprising agility for a woman her age, opened the trunk, and pressed a hidden catch in one corner. The bottom lifted, revealing a hollow space beneath. Rebecca was always clever about hiding things from her husband, Martha said, a note of old sorrow in her voice. Necessary with a man like James Harlow. She withdrew a leather portfolio tied with faded ribbon. "Michael brought this to me the night before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I was to keep it safe for Grace." Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she handed it to Ethan. "I've never looked inside. Didn't want to know more than I already did." Ethan untied the ribbon and opened the portfolio. Inside were dozens of papers, legal documents, letters, bank records, all meticulously organized and annotated in a neat hand that must have been Michael Sullivan's. One document in particular caught his eye, a property deed dated 1849, granting a substantial tract of land to Rebecca Quinn Harlow as inheritance from her grandfather. The description matched exactly the northern section of what Ethan had always believed was his farm. "This proves the land was stolen," he murmured. Martha nodded grimly. "Rebecca tried to claim it after James lost everything gambling. Caldwell knew its value. It had the best timber in the county, and he was already building his lumber business. When Rebecca died so conveniently, and James disappeared after signing everything over," she shook her head. "We all knew, but who could stand against the judge?" Ethan continued through the documents, finding letters between Caldwell and various officials arranging for the quiet transfer of other properties, records of bribes paid, even a list of accidents that had befallen particularly stubborn landowners who refused to sell. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. "This is enough to ruin him," Ethan said, carefully retying the portfolio, "possibly send him to prison." "If it reaches the right authorities," Martha cautioned. "Caldwell has friends in the territorial government judges who owe him favors." "Then we'll need to go higher." Ethan tucked the portfolio inside his coat. "The federal marshal in Omaha has no love for Caldwell. I served with his brother during the war." Martha's expression eased somewhat at this news. "You should go now. Sheriff's men have been patrolling since dawn." As Ethan turned to leave, Martha caught his arm. "Tell Grace." She hesitated, emotion clouding her usually brisk manner. "Tell her I'm proud of her, for standing up to him, for protecting her children as Rebecca couldn't protect her." Ethan promised he would, touched by the depth of feeling in the older woman's voice. He slipped out the back way, keeping to shadows and side streets until he reached Thomas's horse, tethered in a small copse of trees at the edge of town. He was just about to mount when a voice stopped him cold. "That's far enough, Ward." Sheriff Davis stepped from behind a tree rifle aimed squarely at Ethan's chest. Two deputies flanked him, their guns similarly trained. "Hands where I can see them," Davis ordered. "Nice and slow." Ethan complied, mind racing. The portfolio felt heavy against his chest, its contents suddenly the most valuable and dangerous possession he'd ever carried. "What's this about, Sheriff?" he asked, playing for time. Davis snorted. "Don't play dumb. Judge wants a word with you about harboring fugitives and interfering with his legal custody of his grandchildren." The sheriff stepped closer. "Where are they, Ward, the Sullivan woman and the kids?" "Safe," Ethan replied evenly. "Beyond your reach." Anger flashed across Davis's weathered face. "We'll see about that. The judge has papers from the territorial court declaring Grace Sullivan mentally unfit. Papers that authorize him to take custody of all 3 children." "Papers based on lies," Ethan countered. "Like everything else Caldwell has built his empire on." Something shifted in Davis's expression, a flicker of doubt quickly suppressed. "That's not for me to judge. My job is to enforce the law." "Even when you know the law's been corrupted," Ethan challenged. "You were a good man once, Davis. During the war, you had a reputation for fairness." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Things change. People change. Or get changed by men like Caldwell." Ethan took a calculated risk, lowering his hand slightly. "What's he holding over you, Davis? What made you trade your integrity for his approval?" For a moment, genuine conflict played across the sheriff's face. Then his expression hardened again. "Enough talk. You're coming with us to see the judge." Ethan weighed his options. He could try to flee, but the odds of outrunning 3 armed men were slim. If he surrendered, the portfolio would be discovered, and its contents would never reach those who could use them against Caldwell. He was about to make a desperate move when a new voice joined the standoff. "3 against 1 seems hardly sporting, Sheriff." Joshua Reed stepped into the clearing, a shotgun cradled in his arms. Behind him came 2 more men Ethan recognized from town, the blacksmith Samuel Graves and the miller Harold Fisher. "This isn't your business, Reed," Davis warned, though his rifle wavered slightly. "When you start hunting innocent men on the edge of my property, it becomes my business." Reed's normally mild expression had hardened into something formidable. "Especially when it's on the judge's corrupt orders." The deputies exchanged uncertain glances. The odds had shifted from 3 against 1 to 3 against 4, and Reed's shotgun at close range was a powerful equalizer. Davis seemed to reach a similar conclusion. "This won't end here," he said, lowering his rifle slightly. "The judge will have his way eventually. He always does." "Not this time," Reed replied steadily. "There's a reckoning coming, Davis. You might want to consider which side you want to be standing on when it arrives." A long, tense moment passed. Then Davis signaled his deputies to lower their weapons. "We're leaving, but this isn't over, Ward." He fixed Ethan with a hard stare. "Watch your back." The three lawmen mounted their horses and rode away, Davis casting one last unreadable look over his shoulder before they disappeared among the trees. Reed lowered his shotgun with a relieved sigh. "That was closer than I'd like." "Thank you," Ethan said with feeling. "All of you. Been waiting a long time to stand up to Caldwell's lackeys," the blacksmith Graves said grimly. "Just needed the right moment." Reed stepped closer to Ethan. "You got what you came for?" he asked in a low voice. Ethan nodded, patting his coat where the portfolio rested. "Everything we need." "Good. The meeting tonight, it's been moved to the old Miller barn just north of town. Safer than my place now that Caldwell's men are watching." Reed glanced in the direction the sheriff had gone. "Come after dark. Use the creek path from the east. We'll have lookouts posted." With that brief exchange of information, the three men melted back into the trees, leaving Ethan alone with Thomas's horse. He mounted quickly and set off not toward town or the Peterson farm, but in a wide arc that would bring him back to his own property. He needed to check the damage to his cabin, retrieve anything salvageable, and most importantly, avoid leading any of Caldwell's men who might be following him back to Grace and the children. The farm looked desolate as he approached the cabin door, hanging askew, windows broken, the yard trampled by horses. Ethan circled twice before approaching, making sure no one lay in wait. Satisfied he was alone, he dismounted and entered what remained of his home. The destruction was even more complete than he'd first realized. Not content with searching, Caldwell's men had seemed intent on leaving nothing intact. Furniture was smashed, dishes broken, even the stove had been overturned. His few books lay torn and scattered across the floor. Ethan stood in the midst of the destruction, a curious calm settling over him. This place had been his refuge and his prison for 5 years, the physical manifestation of his grief and isolation. Now, looking at its ruins, he felt something unexpected release. The cabin could be rebuilt, the possessions replaced. What mattered now was elsewhere. Grace and her children, the documents that could bring Caldwell to justice, the newfound allies waiting to help them. He gathered what few items remained undamaged: his father's pocket watch, Emma's silver hairbrush that had somehow been overlooked, a tin box containing his war medals, and Sarah's tiny baby shoe. These he wrapped carefully in a relatively clean shirt and placed in his saddlebag. As he prepared to leave, a movement at the edge of the yard caught his eye. He reached for his rifle, then relaxed as he recognized Thomas Peterson approaching on foot. "Thought you might come here," Thomas said, surveying the destruction with a grim expression. "Hannah was worried when you didn't return." "Got delayed," Ethan explained briefly. "Sheriff Davis and his men tried to bring me in, but Reed and some others intervened." Thomas nodded. "Town's dividing into camps. Those loyal to Caldwell, those who've had enough of his tyranny." He kicked at a piece of broken chair on the cabin steps. "Looks like his men were thorough. They didn't find what they were looking for." Ethan patted his coat where the portfolio still rested. "I did." Relief washed over Thomas's face. "Good. What now?" "Meeting tonight at the old Miller barn. Reed thinks we can gather enough support to make a stand." Ethan looked around at what remained of his home, then back to his friend. "But first, I need to get these documents to Grace. Make sure she agrees with the plan." They returned to the Peterson farm together, taking a circuitous route to avoid any watchers. Grace's relief at seeing Ethan safe was evident in her face, though she tried to mask it with practical questions about the documents. When he produced the portfolio, Her fingers trembled slightly as she untied the ribbon. "It's all here," she confirmed after examining the contents. Everything Michael found, plus his own notes, connecting the evidence. She looked up at Ethan, determination hardening her features. "This is enough to destroy him." "If we can get it to the right authorities," Ethan cautioned. "Reed's gathering people tonight who might help us, but it won't be without risk." Grace's hand found his squeezing firmly. "I'm not afraid. Not anymore." As evening approached, preparations began in earnest. Thomas and Ethan cleaned and checked their rifles, while Hannah prepared food for them to take to the meeting. Grace, unable to travel, would remain at the farm with Hannah, the twins, and Lily. Or so they thought. As Ethan prepared to leave, Lily appeared at his side, dressed in her coat and hat. "I'm coming too," she announced, with the same unwavering certainty she'd shown that first night on the road. "No, Lily," Grace said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "I need to be there," the child insisted. "I saw what the bad man did to Papa. I have to tell everyone." Ethan knelt to her level, meeting her serious gaze. "Your mother's right, Lily. It could be dangerous, and she needs you here." Lily's chin set stubbornly. "She has Mrs. Peterson and the babies. You need me. Those people need to hear from someone who saw." There was wisdom in her words that belied her age. Ethan looked to Grace, whose expression wavered between maternal protection and reluctant understanding. "A child's testimony would carry weight," Thomas observed quietly, "especially from one who witnessed the crime firsthand." Grace closed her eyes briefly, her internal struggle visible. When she opened them, resignation had replaced resistance. "You'll keep her safe," she said to Ethan. It wasn't a question. "With my life," he promised. As dusk gathered, Ethan, Thomas, and Lily set out for the old Miller barn. The child rode before Ethan on Thomas's horse, her small back straight, her demeanor almost preternaturally composed. In that moment, looking down at her determined profile, Ethan felt a surge of fierce protectiveness, unlike anything he'd experienced since Sarah's death. The Miller barn stood on a rise just north of Redemption, abandoned since Old Man Miller had died 3 winters past. Its weathered boards glowed silver in the rising moonlight as they approached. Lantern light flickered behind its windows, suggesting others had already arrived. Reed's lookouts intercepted them as promised, guiding them along the creek path to a side entrance. Inside, Ethan was surprised to find the barn nearly full. At least 30 people had gathered, their faces a mix of familiar and unfamiliar. Reed stood near a makeshift table at the center, deep in conversation with Reverend Thomas. Conversations hushed as they entered, all eyes turning toward them, particularly toward Lily, whose presence clearly surprised many. Reed stepped forward to greet them. "Glad you made it," he said, shaking Ethan's hand firmly. "Word's spread since this morning. More support than we dared hope for." Ethan surveyed the gathering. Farmers, shopkeepers, tradesmen, the backbone of Redemption's community. And, in the back, to his surprise, Sheriff Davis stood alone, his expression unreadable. "The sheriff?" Ethan questioned quietly. Reed followed his gaze. "Came of his own accord. Says he has something to contribute." The storekeeper shrugged. "We're keeping an eye on him." Reverend Thomas approached next, his thin face drawn with nervousness, but his eyes clear. "Mr. Ward, thank you for coming, and for bringing—" he faltered as he recognized Lily. "Miss Sullivan, I didn't expect—" "She insisted," Ethan explained. "She witnessed her father's death, wants to testify to what she saw." The Reverend paled slightly. "That would be significant." He turned to address the assembled crowd. "Friends, neighbors, we all know why we've gathered tonight. For too long, Judge Caldwell has ruled Redemption through fear and corruption. Many of us have suffered under his influence, lost land, livelihoods, loved ones. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the barn. Now we have a chance to end his reign, the Reverend continued. Mr. Ward and Mrs. Sullivan have obtained documents that prove the judge's crimes, land theft, bribery, even murder. At the word murder, the murmurs grew louder. Sheriff Davis shifted uncomfortably in the back. Reed took up the thread. Our plan is simple. We need to get these documents to the federal marshal in Omaha. He has the authority to arrest Caldwell and bring charges that will stick, even with the judge's connections in the territorial government. And why would the marshal believe us over Caldwell? Someone called from the crowd. Because I served with his brother in the war, Ethan replied, and because we have more than just documents. He placed a hand gently on Lily's shoulder. We have an eyewitness to Michael Sullivan's murder. All eyes turned to Lily, who stood unflinching under their collective gaze. The child saw something, one farmer asked, doubt evident in his voice. I saw everything, Lily said clearly, her young voice carrying in the suddenly hushed barn. I saw grandfather and the other man arguing with my papa on the balcony. I saw the other man push him. I saw papa fall. Her composure wavered only slightly. Grandfather saw me watching from the garden. That's when I knew we had to run. A stunned silence followed her simple, devastating testimony. Dear God, someone whispered. The silence was broken by footsteps as Sheriff Davis made his way to the front of the gathering. Instinctively, Ethan pulled Lily closer, shielding her with his body. I have something to add, Davis said, his voice rough with what might have been shame. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. This is a confession signed by Joseph Mercer, Judge Caldwell's foreman at the lumber mill. He admits to pushing Michael Sullivan from the balcony on Caldwell's direct orders. Davis handed the paper to Reed. Mercer wrote this on his deathbed last month, made me promise to make it right. And you're only bringing this forward now, Thomas demanded. Davis couldn't meet his eyes. Caldwell has held my gambling debts over my head for years, used them to ensure my cooperation. His shoulders slumped. But there's a line. What he did to Mrs. Sullivan's legs, ordering men to break them while her children watched, that was the line for me. Reed unfolded the confession, scanning its contents. This corroborates the child's account exactly, he confirmed. Between this, her testimony, and the documents, we have an ironclad case. And then what are we waiting for? Someone called out. Let's ride to Omaha tonight. It's not that simple, Ethan cautioned. Caldwell will have men watching the roads, and Grace and the twins are still vulnerable at the Peterson farm. If we all leave, he's right, Thomas agreed. We need to split our forces, some to guard Mrs. Sullivan and the babies, some to get the evidence to Omaha. The discussion that followed was intense but focused. In the end, they developed a plan. A small group, Ethan, Reed, and surprisingly Sheriff Davis, would take the documents and Lily to Omaha at first light. The others would form a protective circle around the Peterson farm, ready to defend Grace and the twins if Caldwell's men appeared. As the meeting broke up, Lily tugged at Ethan's sleeve. Will this make Mama safe? She asked, her composure finally showing cracks that revealed the frightened child beneath. Ethan knelt beside her. Yes, he promised. Your bravery tonight will help make your mother safe. Make all of you safe. She nodded solemnly, then shocked him by wrapping her small arms around his neck in a fierce hug. I knew you were the right one, she whispered. When I saw you on the road, I knew. The simple faith in her words humbled him. As he held her, Ethan realized something profound had shifted within him. The broken pieces of his heart, long frozen in grief, had begun to thaw, and reform around this child and her family. Whatever came next, he couldn't return to his solitary existence. Didn't want to. They left the barn cautiously in small groups spread over an hour to avoid attracting attention. Ethan, Thomas, and Lily were among the last to depart. The ride back to the Peterson farm was quiet, Lily eventually falling asleep against Ethan's chest, her small body warm and trusting. Hannah met them at the door, her expression anxious. "Grace has been asking for you," she told Ethan. "She's worried." He found Grace in the parlor, propped up on the sofa where they'd left her. Relief flooded her face when she saw Lily safe in his arms. "She fell asleep on the ride back," Ethan explained gently, transferring the child to a nearby chair and covering her with a quilt. "She was incredible, Grace. So brave, so clear. Everyone believed her." As he related the events of the meeting, including Sheriff Davis's unexpected contribution, Grace's expression ranged from amazement to cautious hope. "So tomorrow you leave for Omaha," she said when he'd finished. "With Lily. It's safer for her to come with us," Ethan explained. "If Caldwell attacks the farm, she'd be in danger here. Reed knows a family in Omaha where she can stay while we meet with the marshal." Grace nodded, understanding the logic, even as maternal concern clouded her features. "And then justice," Ethan said simply. "Caldwell will be arrested, his assets frozen, the stolen lands returned to their rightful owners." "Including yours," Grace said softly. "My mother's portion of your farm was never rightfully mine to begin with," Ethan finished. "I built my life on stolen land without knowing it. That needs to be set right." Grace reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "What if we could find a way to set it right together?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with possibility. Ethan looked at their joined hands, then at Grace's face, open, vulnerable, yet strong, in a way that moved him deeply. "I'd like that," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Very much." Outside, the moon sailed high above the Nebraska plains, casting silver light over fields ready for planting. Inside, two broken people began to imagine a future neither had dared hope for just days before. Dawn broke clear and cold, the horizon stained crimson and gold. Ethan stood on the Petersons' porch, watching the sun reclaim the land from darkness. Behind him, preparations for departure were underway. Reed had arrived with fresh horses, Davis with supplies for the journey. Lily stood beside Ethan, silent but watchful, her small hand nestled in his. She had awoken with the same solemn determination that had marked her since their first meeting, accepting the day's challenges with a courage that continually amazed him. "Will it be dangerous?" she asked suddenly, her eyes as fixed on the sunrise. Ethan considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "It could be," he admitted. "But Sheriff Davis knows the back roads, and we'll have good horses. We should reach Omaha by nightfall." She nodded, absorbing this. "When we come back, will you stay with us, or go back to your empty house?" The direct question, so typical of Lily, caught Ethan off guard. Before he could formulate a response, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. A group of men from town, led by the blacksmith Graves, arrived to form part of the protective detail for the farm. "All quiet on the roads," Graves reported. "No sign of Caldwell's men yet." Thomas, who had been checking ammunition on the porch, frowned. "That worries me more than if they were out in force. The judge isn't one to accept defeat quietly." As if summoned by his words, another rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at a gallop. Everyone tensed, rifles raising, until Reed called out, "It's Martha Quinn." The elderly midwife reined her horse to a stop in the yard, looking remarkably unruffled, despite what must have been a hard ride. "Caldwell's gone," she announced without preamble. packed up in the night and fled, took what valuables he could carry and 3 of his most loyal men. Her eyes found Ethan. He knows you have the documents. Someone at the meeting must have warned him. The news rippled through the gathered defenders. A traitor in their midst. Or simply someone who'd lost nerve and sought to curry favor with the judge. "Does it change our plans?" Reed asked Ethan. Ethan considered carefully. "No, we still need the federal marshal's authority. Caldwell may be running, but he has resources connections. He could return when we've lowered our guard." "Ethan's right," Davis agreed. "We need to make this official get warrants issued, cut off his escape routes." The decision made final preparations moved swiftly. Ethan went inside to say goodbye to Grace, finding her dressed and sitting up, her splinted legs carefully arranged before her. She had insisted on being moved to the kitchen so she could share breakfast with them before their departure. "Be careful," she said as he knelt beside her chair. "Caldwell's most dangerous when cornered." "We'll be fine," Ethan assured her. "Davis knows what he's doing, and Reed has friends along the route to Omaha. We'll be back before you know it." He hesitated, then added, "With a future we can build together." Grace's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I'll hold you to that promise, Ethan Ward." Their goodbye was interrupted by commotion outside, shouting, then the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot. Ethan was on his feet, instantly drawing his pistol as he moved toward the door. Thomas burst in. "Caldwell," he shouted. "He's here, with at least a dozen men." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Where's Lily?" "Still outside with Reed," Thomas replied. "They're pinned down behind the barn." Without hesitation, Ethan pushed past Thomas and out the door, keeping low as bullets whizzed overhead. The yard had become a battlefield, with Caldwell's men advancing from the road, while the town defenders returned fire from whatever cover they could find. Through the chaos, Ethan spotted Reed and Lily crouched behind a water trough near the barn, cut off from the house by the line of fire. Reed was returning shots when possible, one arm wrapped protectively around the child. Ethan had to reach them. He ducked behind a wagon, assessed distances and angles as he'd done in countless battles during the war. The barn offered the best cover, but reaching it meant crossing 20 yards of open ground under fire. A hand fell on his shoulder, Davis, his sheriff's badge glinting in the morning sun. "I'll draw their fire left," he said without preamble. "You go right around the chicken coop. It'll give you better cover." Ethan nodded gratefully. "On 3. Davis positioned himself, then began counting. 1, 2, 3. The sheriff broke cover, firing rapidly toward Caldwell's men while running in a zigzag pattern. As hoped, their attention followed him, bullets kicking up dust at his heels. Ethan seized the moment, sprinting toward the chicken coop. He made it without drawing fire, then continued his approach to the barn, using every bit of available cover. When he reached Reed and Lily, the child's face lit with relief. "I knew you'd come," she said simply. "Always," Ethan replied quickly, assessing their situation. "We need to get back to the house. It's more defensible." Reed nodded grimly. "Caldwell's men are between us and the main door, but there's a side entrance around back. If we can reach it—" A familiar voice interrupted their planning. "That won't be necessary." Judge Caldwell himself stepped into view from inside the barn, a pistol in his hand. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, his silver hair uncombed, his clothes wrinkled from hasty travel. But his eyes burned with the same cold authority that had dominated redemption for decades. "The documents, Ward," he said calmly, as if requesting the time of day. "Hand them over, and perhaps I'll allow the child to live." Ethan shifted, placing himself between Lily and the judge's weapon. "It's over, Caldwell. Everyone knows what you've done. Running won't help you now." A mirthless smile crossed the judge's face. "Is that what you think? That I'm running?" He shook his head slowly. "No, Mr. Ward. I'm simply relocating to Mexico, where my money will ensure a comfortable retirement. But first, I need those documents destroyed." "So you can start again somewhere else," Reed challenged. "Steal more land, ruin more lives." "Business," Caldwell corrected. "Just business." His gaze shifted to Lily, who stared back with undisguised hatred. "Such a troublesome child. Should have dealt with you along with your father." Ethan felt Lily stiffen behind him. "You won't touch her," he growled. "Perhaps not." Caldwell's pistol remained steady. "But I will have those documents. Now." Time seemed to slow as Ethan considered his options. The portfolio was inside his coat. He could pretend to retrieve it, use the movement to draw his own weapon. But with Lily so close, the risk was too great. Before he could decide, a shot rang out, not from Caldwell's gun, but from somewhere behind him. The judge's expression registered surprise, then pain. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt, then back up at Ethan. "Impossible," he murmured, before crumpling to the ground. Ethan whirled to see Sheriff Davis in the barn doorway, rifle still raised. "You always did talk too much, Judge," the sheriff said quietly. With their leader fallen, Caldwell's men lost heart. Some fled immediately. Others surrendered when they realized they were outnumbered by the town defenders who'd regrouped during the distraction. In the sudden quiet, Lily broke free from Reed's protective hold and ran to Ethan, who swept her into a fierce embrace. "It's over," he told her. "Truly over now." As the morning sun climbed higher, casting its golden light over the aftermath of battle, Ethan carried Lily back toward the house. Grace stood in the doorway, supported by Hannah, her face tight with fear until she saw them approaching unharmed. "Mama!" Lily called, wriggling free of Ethan's arms to hop awkwardly up the steps. "The bad man is gone forever. Sheriff Davis shot him." Grace gathered her daughter close, looking over the child's head at Ethan with a question in her eyes. "It's done," he confirmed. "Caldwell's dead. His men captured or fled." He climbed the steps to join them, adding softly, "We're free now. All of us." Inside, as the wounded were tended and the story pieced together, Ethan found himself standing by the window, watching Reed and Davis organize the prisoners for transport to town. Thomas joined him, offering a cup of coffee. "What happens now?" his friend asked. Ethan's gaze drifted to where Grace sat with Lily and the twins, the family reunited and safe at last. "Justice," he replied. "We still need to take the documents to Omaha, make everything official. The stolen lands will be returned to their rightful owners." "And after that," Thomas pressed gently. A slow smile spread across Ethan's face, perhaps the first genuine smile he'd shown in 5 years. "After that, we build something new. Together." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder. "About time," he said gruffly, but his eyes were warm with approval. Later that day, as the excitement settled and plans were made for the journey to Omaha, Ethan found a quiet moment alone with Grace on the Petersons' porch. The twins slept peacefully inside, and Lily had finally succumbed to exhaustion after her ordeal. "I've been thinking about what you said," Grace began, her hand finding his as they sat side by side. "About setting things right together." Ethan turned to face her fully. "I meant it. The land that was your mother's, it should go to you and the children. But I've worked it, made it thrive." He took a breath, gathering courage. "Perhaps we could make it thrive together." Grace's eyes softened. "Is that a proposal, Ethan Ward?" "Not yet," he admitted. Too soon for that, but a beginning. A promise of what could be when we're both ready. She squeezed his hand, her smile warming him more thoroughly than the spring sunshine. A beginning, she agreed. I like that. As evening fell across the Nebraska plains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Ethan Ward sat with Grace Sullivan on the Petersons' porch. Their hands joined their futures, unwritten, but full of newfound hope. Inside, the children slept safely. Lily, who had claimed him as father on a rain-soaked road. Emma and Jacob, whose innocence represented all that was worth fighting for. 5 years of isolation and grief had ended in a week of chaos and danger. But from those ashes, something precious had emerged, not just justice, but the promise of family, of home, of love. The promised land, Ethan realized, wasn't a place at all. It was these people, this moment, this second chance he'd never dared to hope for, and he would cherish it all the days of his life. The summer sun blazed high over the Nebraska plains, turning the tall grass to waves of gold that rippled in the warm breeze. From the newly built porch of the Ward homestead, Grace Sullivan watched Lily chase butterflies among the wildflowers that bordered the freshly tilled garden. The child's laughter carried across the yard, a sound that had grown more frequent as the shadow of Harlan Caldwell receded from their lives. "She's coming back to herself," Martha Quinn observed, rocking gently in one of the new chairs Thomas Peterson had crafted as a housewarming gift. "Children are resilient that way," Grace nodded, adjusting little Emma in her arms. The baby girl had grown plump and strong in the months since their ordeal, her curious blue eyes always seeking her twin brother, who napped peacefully in the cradle nearby. "Sometimes I worry she had to grow up too fast, that she missed something essential." "She's getting it back now," Martha assured her. "Look at her, she's playing like a child should." In the distance, Ethan appeared on horseback, returning from the north pasture where he'd been mending fences. Grace felt the familiar warmth spread through her chest at the sight of him. Even now, after all they'd been through together, she sometimes marveled at how quickly he had become the center of their new life. The territorial court's ruling had come through last month. The northern section of the farm, once stolen from her mother, now legally belonged to Grace. The rest of Ethan's land remained his. But such distinctions had become meaningless between them. They worked the property together, making plans for expanding the orchard and adding a small herd of dairy cows. The cabin that had once housed Ethan's solitary existence was gone, replaced by a larger structure built with the help of nearly everyone in redemption. The town had rallied around them after Caldwell's death, eager to make amends for years of silent complicity. Joshua Reed had organized the effort, bringing lumber from his brother's mill at cost. The blacksmith Graves had forged new hinges and locks. Even Sheriff Davis, now wearing his badge with renewed pride, had spent his off hours helping to raise the roof beams. "Riders coming," Martha noted, her sharp eyes picking out a dust cloud on the road from town. Grace recognized the two figures as they drew closer. Reverend Thomas and Joshua Reed, likely bringing news from their weekly meeting with the territorial officials who were still untangling Caldwell's affairs. Ethan dismounted near the barn, exchanged a few words with Lily, then made his way to the porch, wiping sweat from his brow. His face had changed in these past months. The hard lines of grief and isolation had softened, replaced by the weathered contentment of a man who had found his place in the world again. "Visitors," Grace said, nodding toward the approaching riders. "I see them." Ethan leaned down to place a gentle kiss on Emma's forehead, then one on Grace's cheek. Such gestures of affection had become natural between them, evolving slowly from tentative beginnings. "Probably news about the mill property." Caldwell's assets, the lumber mill, the grand house on the hill, vast tracts of forest, had been placed in a trust by the territorial government. A special commission had been formed to sort through decades of fraud and determine the rightful owners of each property. The process was painstaking, but justice, long delayed, was finally taking shape. "Mr. Ward, Mrs. Sullivan," Reed called out cheerfully as he and the Reverend reached the yard. They tethered their horses to the hitching post and climbed the porch steps, Reed removing his hat respectfully. "Fine afternoon, isn't it?" "Indeed it is," Ethan agreed, offering the men water from the pitcher Grace had prepared. "You look like you bring news." Reverend Thomas nodded, accepting the drink gratefully. "We've just come from the commission hearing. They've made their decision about the Harlow claim, your mother's property," he added, looking at Grace. She felt a flutter of anxiety. "And it's as we hoped," Reed announced with a smile. "The entire northern section of the property is legally yours again, with the boundaries adjusted to include the spring that was originally part of your grandfather's homestead." He produced an official-looking document from his saddlebag. "Here's the deed, properly registered and witnessed." Grace accepted the paper with trembling hands, Emma still nestled in the crook of her arm. Her mother's property, stolen through violence and deceit, was finally returned. She looked up at Ethan, searching his face for any sign of regret or loss. He met her gaze steadily, his eyes clear and certain. "It's right," he said simply. "It's how it should be." "There's more," Reverend Thomas added. The commission reviewed Ethan's purchase of the adjoining land, the section he bought fairly from the Clarkson family 10 years ago. They've confirmed his legal ownership without question. "So together, you have quite a substantial holding," Reed concluded. "One of the finest pieces of land in the county, I'd say." Martha snorted softly. "As if that matters a whit to either of them." The older woman was right. The legal boundaries between their properties had become a mere formality, a line on a map that held no meaning in their daily lives. What mattered was the home they were building, the future they were crafting from the broken pieces of their pasts. Lily came running up the steps, her cheeks flushed with sun and exertion. "Is that paper about our land?" she asked, peering at the document in her mother's hand. "Yes, sweetheart," Grace replied. "It says, this land that was your grandmother's is ours now, officially." Lily nodded, as if this was merely confirmation of what she had always known. "Does that mean Mr. Ward won't ever have to leave?" The question brought a moment of stillness to the porch. Ethan knelt down to Lily's level, something he had done since their first meeting in the rain. "Would you like me to stay, Lily, for good?" The child considered this with characteristic seriousness. "You're already our pa," she stated matter-of-factly. "But Mama says sometimes people need to say things properly with promises." A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the adults, but Ethan's expression remained solemn as he met the child's gaze. "Your mama is right. Proper promises are important." He rose and turned to Grace, his weathered face suddenly uncertain. They had spoken of this in quiet moments after the children were asleep, the possibility of making official what had already taken root in their hearts. But always, they had decided to wait, to give themselves and the children time to heal from their respective wounds. Now, standing in the golden afternoon light with friends as witnesses, and Lily's question hanging in the air, the moment seemed to have arrived of its own accord. "Grace?" Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'd like to make those proper promises, if you're willing." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes. She passed Emma to Martha's waiting arms and stood moving to Ethan's side. "I'm willing," she replied softly. "Well then," Reverend Thomas said, clearing his throat, "as the appointed minister of redemption, I believe I can be of service." though we might want to schedule a more formal occasion." "No," Grace interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. "Here, now, with those who've stood by us." She looked around at their small gathering: Martha, who had delivered her babies and protected her secrets; Reed, who had risked everything to help them; Reverend Thomas, who had found his courage when it mattered most; and Lily, whose unwavering conviction had started it all. "I think that's perfect," Ethan agreed, taking her hand in his. The impromptu ceremony was brief but profound. Against the backdrop of the prairie, they both loved Ethan, and Grace exchanged simple vows, promises to cherish and protect, to build and nurture, to face whatever storms might come together rather than alone. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Lily clapped her hands in delight. Jacob chose that moment to wake his lusty cry, joining his sister's babbling as if in celebration. "I believe this calls for something stronger than water," Reed declared, producing a bottle of whiskey from his saddlebag. "A toast to the Ward family." As glasses were filled and congratulations offered, Ethan drew Grace aside for a moment of privacy. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "It's not too soon." Grace shook her head, a sense of perfect peace settling over her. "It's been soon enough, since the moment Lily decided you were our father in the rain." She smiled up at him. "She saw what we needed before we did." He chuckled, running a gentle hand over her hair. "She's always been the brave one." "We're all brave now," Grace replied. "All healing." As evening descended, their friends departed with promises to spread the news through town. A proper celebration would be organized, Reed assured them, but for tonight they had the gift of privacy time to absorb this new chapter of their shared story. Later, with the children asleep and the house quiet around them, Ethan and Grace sat on their porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The first crickets of evening began their chorus, a sound that had once amplified Ethan's loneliness, but now seemed to celebrate their togetherness. "I never thought I'd have this again," he admitted, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. "A family, a purpose beyond survival." "Nor I," Grace agreed. "After Michael died, I couldn't see beyond the next hour, the next minute sometimes." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I was just trying to keep the children alive. And now?" She smiled in the gathering darkness. "Now I'm thinking about what to plant in the south field next spring, about adding a schoolroom to the house as Lily grows, about watching the twins take their first steps on this land." She turned to face him. "I'm thinking about our future." Ethan's kiss was gentle, still carrying a hint of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. When they parted, he gestured toward the expanse of land stretching before them, silvered now by moonlight. "When I first settled here, I thought this was the promised land, rich soil, good water, a place to build something lasting." His voice grew contemplative. "After the fire, it became a kind of prison, a place to exist but not to live." "And now," Grace echoed his earlier question. Ethan's arm tightened around her. "Now I understand that the promised land isn't a place at all. It's people. It's family. It's the courage to begin again after loss." He looked down at her, his face solemn in the moonlight. "It's you and Lily and the twins. It's this life we're building together." Grace nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate deep within her. "From broken pieces," she murmured, "made stronger at the mended places," he finished. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, witnessing this newest covenant on the Nebraska plains. The land that had seen so much sorrow now cradled a different story, one of healing, of justice, restored of love, finding root in soil once parched by grief. The promised land, Grace realized, was wherever you found the courage to plant hope again. And their harvest was just beginning.